As it's 6:30, I think we may as well begin. Welcome to you all. It seems very strange, A, being in person and B, being in the council chamber. I feel like I'm a sort of a mayor, a mayor in disguise or something. So anyway, warm welcome to you all in the room and a warm welcome to everyone who is watching the streaming. The meeting is being held in person, but we do have to remember to maintain social distancing, and I'd be very grateful if you could wear your masks unless you are speaking. And rather than standing up to speak, it would be great if you just remain seated. We will, as usual, be discussing the reports. The leadership team will be discussing the reports in front of them with officers and asking questions. I will then ask the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee whether there are any reports which came from OSC on Tuesday, if there's any comments she has, and then anyone else in the room who has a particular question that they wish to raise, I will ask them. Before we begin, could we please join together in 72-second silence to remember all those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Our governance officer will confirm once the 72 seconds is over. So we'll begin now. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Apologies for absence. I understand Councillor Will can't be here, but do we have any others, Tom? We don't. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting on the 15th of April. Can I sign these as a true and accurate record, or are there any comments? No comments? So agreed that I can sign them. Thank you. Just do that. Great. Okay. Right. So you will remember, fellow leadership team members, that we agreed a resourcing framework in December 2020, and it set out our plans for the next 3 years of the Grenfell Recovery Programme. The 4 decisions that we're being asked to consider tonight follow on from the commitments we made in that resourcing framework. So we have the decisions tonight on, firstly, the dedicated service, secondly, targeted support for children and young people in schools and in the community, thirdly, the community-based support for adults, and finally, the next phase of the Grenfell Community Programme. And I would just want to take this opportunity to emphasise that all 4 proposals are directly shaped by what we've heard from bereaved survivors and residents over the last 6 months. And I hope that this is proof of our commitment to listen and to absolutely ensure that we have greater resident involvement in every part of the Grenfell Recovery Programme. As set out in the reports, we've heard from hundreds of residents with over 600 views expressed through surveys, through focus groups, workshops, and other channels. We've also communicated widely about our plans in newsletters, on social media and via local networks to raise awareness as much as possible. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's participated in this so far. However, these decisions, they're not the end of our engagement with the communities. As we launch new initiatives, we'll continue to seek feedback and involvement from bereaved survivors and residents. And in some areas, you'll see we're looking at beginning new engagement activity, such as outlined in the next paper, with proposals for really wide-ranging consultation and the review of the dedicated service. As we move forward, our focus will be embedding new arrangements, but also then delivering our other key commitments around impact, outcomes, and legacy. So there will be further decisions for the leadership team in the coming months. Okay, so now let us start with the paper A4, Proposals for a Consultation with the Grenfell Bereaved and Survivors. And Anne, would you like to introduce this?
I would, thank you. So this paper A4 is the proposal for a consultation with Grenfell Bereaved and Survivors about the dedicated service. The dedicated service was established in April 2019 and it came about after a co-design exercise with the bereaved and survivors. Approximately 700 bereaved and survivors are currently accessing the service, and that's over 96% of all of those who are eligible. While there's always scope for improvement, the general feedback from bereaved and survivors is quite positive. Since December, we've focused on continuing to deliver high-quality, personalised support to the bereaved and survivors through the latest phase of the pandemic and with the additional impact of the public inquiry. So as part of the resourcing framework, we said we would continue to work with the bereaved and survivors to shape the future of their service. And so this report tonight talks about how we're planning to do that. We last did a full consultation on the form and functions of the dedicated service in 2018. And we know that people's needs and aspirations for the future have probably changed and moved since then. We continue to seek feedback and to change and adapt the service since then, but we think now is the right time to ask the bereaved and survivors about the overall model and shape of the service. So we do have a steering group which is made up of bereaved and survivors, and so there is a feedback loop as the service runs for the users of the service to give feedback. But we really feel that now is the time to kind of pause and really reflect on what changes can be made. So as part of this, we will be reaching out to all the bereaved and survivors to ask for their views on the future and their thoughts on how the service may work. We want to hear from as many different bereaved and survivors as possible, and we really are collectively committed to reaching out to as many of them as we possibly can and making sure that people feel safe and comfortable and able to give feedback. If our approach here tonight is agreed, we will be conducting the consultation in 2 phases. The first is going to be about hearing feedback about the existing service and ideas for how we might improve it. And then the second phase will be about sharing that feedback and exploring potential alternative models. And we really are open to any changes, a very wide range of changes and outcomes, depending on what we hear from the bereaved and survivors. But there are certain limits, and we want to be very clear about what those are, and they are outlined in the paper. And if we do agree this proposal tonight, I expect that the leadership team will be asked to make a formal decision on the model, the final model, in autumn 2021. So welcome any questions, comments, and any discussion.
Thank you. So questions? Johnny first.
Thank you, Councillor Sarin, and for the paper. I guess I wanted to ask, as it's been 3 years since the previous consultation, has the impact of coronavirus on how people communicate and consult, how has that changed the approach, or is there anything you've learned from the way that we've done things a bit differently over the last year in terms of how you're going to go forward with the consultation?
Sorry, I'll probably refer that question, which is a really good one, because obviously COVID has affected all of our consultations, but I'll probably hand that to Callum, please, to answer.
Thanks, Councillor. I think in general the position has evolved positively, and actually our communication levels have improved. It's been one of the silver linings of COVID for us. I think we've transitioned more widely from only really doing face-to-face visits to doing online visits, face-to-face phone calls, and a whole range of other different forms of interface. And we recently trialled different forms of surveys about, for example, the future of the Friends and Family Assistance Centre, and we had, in what was quite a short time period, higher levels of engagement in the consultation than we had in previous iterations and times. So I think we'll be building on that and using really a multi-channeled approach, both in person, in groups, through telephone calls and online, as well as paper surveys. So it'll be a positive mixture.
Thank you. Mary.
I just wanted to ask about, it talks about this being a very bespoke service, and I mean, I know this is about the consultation, but just while we're talking about it, because it's such an important service, how bespoke it is, and I'd love some examples of the sort of different sorts of tailoring. And also, in paragraph 4.4, it talks about the one-to-one relationship, and I just wondered what our staff turnover is, and is it a very stable environment for people and their relationships with their person they have the one-to-one with?
Again, if I may, I'll ask Callum to respond to both of those really great questions.
Of course, thanks, Councillor. So the first point in terms of personalisation, we personalise the service in two main ways. So the interface between the individual bereavement survivor and the worker, and what they do is governed by a support plan, and a support plan has 5 main different life areas that we work with and across, and there's no mandatory fields, so people are able to work with their worker on what works for them, what's important to them, and indeed the actual provision of support can really vary. So for some people, they have really focused on educational development for their children, and that has seen the sort of one-on-one workers with their individual dedicated service worker, but also with our educational function, and a lot of proactive work with our children's services colleagues actually interfacing with people at school, whereas other people have preferred to support their children more privately and have asked our service to look more at, say, supporting them to restart their businesses. And again, we've worked with the economy department there to really support people to get their businesses back off the ground. So it very much depends on what's important to the individual. In terms of the second point, which was around the stability. Yeah, so I think it'd be fair to say that's been a positive area of improvement. So in the early years of the previous service, the Keywork service, we had quite a lot of turnover, and it was quite a lot of flux, and it led to quite a lot of complaints. When we launched the dedicated service, the benefit of having done the initial co-design was that we were able to be very clear on what bereavement survivors wanted, and it reduced the risk in us committing more permanently to our members of staff. And since then we've been able to offer members of staff permanent contracts, and at the moment, we've got 17 dedicated service workers, and I think we've had a couple of people go off on maternity leave, but only actual one person leave. We'd expected it to be slightly higher. It means that it produces a different challenge about how we maintain well-being and prevent burnout and other challenges, but staff turnover currently hasn't been an issue.
That sounds very positive.
Anyone else? Anyone else got other questions? Kim.
I do apologise. Sorry, on page 3, and thank you for the report. Might be slightly disingenuous. I was just looking, obviously it's a very creditable 83.8% that are commenting on the service as being of good or very good support, but I suppose it begs the question of the 16.2%, which, looking at the cohort numbers, is 100 people. And I just wondered if you could maybe outline a little bit about the issues that people didn't like and how we might address them. Thank you.
Without wanting to continue passing the buck to Callum, perhaps Callum could answer that question, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I think alongside that 83.8%, which we haven't published, is around about 15% of sort of average ratings. But we do have, and we report to the steering group, the numbers of people who have rated their service poor and very poor, because we want to look at it. And thankfully, I think in that same period, I think it's 18 out of almost 500 different ratings that have been rated at that more acute level. It's tended to be where we've interfaced across a wider partnership. So in some regards, it's been around someone who's struggled to settle, and the work that we've been doing with them and alongside our housing colleagues hasn't quite managed for them to feel like they're making the progress they want to make. In other cases, it's been around I think some fair challenge around how well we've pivoted or provided specific forms of support in what can be quite specific requests. So one place we do get some challenge, we do work hand in glove with our government colleagues around it, is around, we have, not to give a really long example, but we have families who we support who don't have recourse to public funds and are interested in having a long-term settlement here, but are struggling through that transition. So again, there we tend to see that they feel that, that there's a question about whether we could be doing more. As I say, we analyse all of the ratings that come through that position on a monthly basis and work hard to try and reduce them. The numbers have always been improving, but anyone who records it as poor or very poor is one too many.
If there are no other comments from the Leadership Committee, I'd quite like to ask the Chair of the OSC, because we went through this in quite a lot of detail on Tuesday night.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I'd like to make a comment first, and then I've got a question. But we all know that it is the most difficult to hear the quiet voices, and we also know that there are language barriers. So in order to reach those people, I mean, I would suggest, COVID permitting, that you would use the dedicated service workers and, you know, have face-to-face interviews with people who are either, you know, I don't know, timid or have big language problems and all the rest of it, because I think we can't rely on people filling in a form or telephone interviews or whatever. I think we really have to reach out to people to capture all the voices. And then the question I've got is that I know it is good that you are open to looking at another organisation potentially delivering these services, but I think it would be hellishly difficult to do that, because I can't quite see how you would provide continuity of service with individuals and actually have somebody else, you know, involved somehow in the process. And my question is, because I think most people will want to stick with the council and the dedicated service as it is, but if there were a group who would actually prefer to have another organisation delivering these services, how would you manage to accommodate that? How would that work? Could you split it, and would the council maybe have the majority of it and then another organisation delivering, you know, a part of it?
I'd just like to start by saying, if we're going into consultation saying that we're really open to everything, that means we really are open to everything, and we are going to listen to everybody. And should they decide that a group wanting us to commission a specific service, I think we'd be up for that. We can't go into consultation saying, you know, we really want to hear your views, but by the way, you can't do this. I mean, the parameters where we said which we cannot move are clearly set out in the paper. But anyway, Callum, perhaps you'd like to pick up on that.
Yes, but what I'm
I'm just sort of highlighting a practical reality, as it is actually going to be very hard. I
Yes.
agree you have to listen to everyone, and you can't prejudge these things.
No.
But the question is, would it be possible to do half and half? I mean, that's a question.
Yeah, Callum, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, of course, and thanks, Councillor, for the question. I think it's worth initially reflecting on the fact that the service currently is delivered through multiple different organisations. So the dedicated service workers are employed by the council and very much delivered by the council, whereas we have a third of the service which is commissioned services. So we have got used to a working model where, for example, we work hand in glove with the Citizens Advice Bureau, who do a lot of casework. So it wouldn't be by any means be impossible. And as the leader of the council said, if that was what was if that was what came through the consultation, we would work hard to be able to deliver it. You know, also we've been always attempting to improve our working relationship with the NHS and the NHS's side of the service, so that represents another opportunity. And I think we do have to recognise that for some of the bereaved survivors, that they do find the experience of receiving support from the council in this moment, because of the situation we find themselves in, very difficult. So it's a question we need to openly consider, really.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? No. Okay, could we please look at the recommendations in paragraph 2, and do we agree to the proposed consultation, the scope and parameters of the review, the approach to gathering feedback and input, and the suggested range and form of questions? Are you happy with everything that's in the report on those? Agreed. You agreed? Thank you very much. Could we please now therefore go to paper A5, which is targeted Grenfell recovery support for children and young people in schools and in community settings. So Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, I'd like to present the paper this evening as is about the future of the mental health and wellbeing support for people affected by, children and young people affected by, obviously, the tragedy at Grenfell Tower. We have listened to residents, and first of all, we have consulted with a wide range of people, 150 people, in order to get the best service that we can provide them as a council. So we've heard from parents, children and young people, we've heard from the schools directly, some of the providers that had previously provided the services, and the wider North Kensington community, such as residents associations, etc. As you'll see in the report, we got a very good response rate, about 150 people, which is an excellent rate for a council consultation, especially one involving children. And I'm really pleased that we've heard from a wide range of people what services could best suit them. As you'll see in the report, it's recommended that the providers that we are currently provided with, many people who responded were very pleased with their work and the impact they had on the community. That's both in terms of schools and the community-based settings. So as you will be able to see that we have recommended, or I've recommended in the report, that a leadership team agree that. It's for funding over the next 3 years as part of our overall Grenfell recovery strategy, of course, and it will provide all sorts of help and assistance to young people and children, both mental health and well-being, through various means, of which are listed in the report in terms of what the different parts of the community can provide. So I think it's a very positive step forward. Of course, the impact of COVID has somewhat acutely raised certain challenges, but this will help with those particular students and young people who need assistance, and I'm pleased to present the report this evening. Thank you.
Can I start off, Josh? Yes. Okay, I'm going to ask you the first question.
Please.
4.4, it says emotional health and wellbeing services are separate to the Grenfell Education Fund. We've had a paper from the Children's Select Committee from Kathleen Williams, who I believe is a head teacher in North Kensington, who's a co-opted member, and she ends it by saying, I'd appreciate if you'd help me understand the decision-making process in relation to this. And so I guess my question is, could you please sort of describe the difference between the Grenfell Education Fund and the funds here, and why the Grenfell Education Fund doesn't feature more prominently in this report?
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a really good question. I'd like to thank Kathleen, of course, for all the help that she has. She's a great head teacher at St Francis, and I know she puts her students in her school right at the forefront, which is great to see. So in terms of the Grenfell Education Fund, it is separate and distinct from what we're discussing this evening. So this evening is definitely the emotional health and wellbeing support for children and young people. The Grenfell Education Fund was established basically soon after the fire itself in 2017, and that is designed to help children in different means. So that's tutoring, IT support, textbooks, or anything that children maybe who are affected by the tragedy can help bid for. They do this on behalf of their school. So the school head teachers, the 17 head teachers from North Kensington make up the steering group of the Grenfell Education Fund. And it is in part funded by RBKC and part funded by the Department for Education. This year's budget for the Grenfell Educational Fund is £500,000, and in terms of how decisions are made of that, the students, or the teachers I should say, are put in a bid to the Grenfell Educational Fund, and that steering group approves it on the basis of certain metrics that need to be met. In terms of this decision this evening, that's part of the overall Grenfell Recovery Programme. So it is, while it's part of the same umbrella, it's separate and distinct in this particular respect, with a separate and distinct budget. And how the decisions are made is, obviously, what I explained earlier, we have sought feedback and consultation from many people in the community. That's all fed in to this report, and as I said, we've listened to everyone. There was a diverse range of opinions, and speaking with officers, and obviously myself as lead member all had an input on it, which I then present obviously to the leadership team tonight for approval or unapproval, depending on how we vote later on. So in terms of that, the decision-making process is quite different for both particular individual circumstances.
Other questions? Johnny, and then Catherine.
Oh, no. Thanks, Josh. And generally, I think it's a very good paper. I wanted to ask about the 44% of parents and carers whose children were not accessing services because they hadn't been aware of them. And just linking into the recommendation from Councillor Evans's fantastic Families Select Committee, her key recommendation at 4.13 is around the need to promote the service even more and to do a better job at reaching those hard-to-reach groups. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit about anything you hope to do or that we might do to respond to that recommendation and try and reach out even more widely than we have in the past.
Thank you. Thank you, Johnny. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The 44% figure is disappointing. When I first saw that came through, of course, I did challenge officers on the fact that why was the figure so high, because we wanted to promote the service as much as possible. However, I think running the consultation itself was a benefit to that. More people are aware of that now. And in order to obviously help with the service, what we're also going to do as part of the family service recommendations, which I've accepted, and I've spoken to officers about as well, is promote this through obviously different means. We're going to have a dedicated children's services part of the RBKC website for Grenfell support, of which people can access. We're going to have a leaflet. You said what we did kind of leaflet that we're going to do as well. We're also looking to reform some of our offerings on how we communicate that, and that could be through North Kensington News and other means. Of course, social media, of course that's not always available to everyone, and through obviously schools directly themselves in order to either promote it themselves as schools or for their wider community as well. So I think the 44% thing, while disappointing, I think was a good catalyst for us to really take a step back and really think about how we can communicate this better. And I think this evening, if we do make this decision, it's going to benefit a lot of people on the basis of that.
Catherine.
Thank you, and thank you as well for this excellent paper. I just wanted to ask, in both the school-based funding and the community-based funding, you allocate funds to the different organisations across the 3 years. But how do you know by year 3 that they will be the right organisations to deliver the right services? Because obviously in 3 years' time, we're not sure what the need will be.
As well, Catherine. So, in terms of the service, so this is very much, it's like a living tree, basically. The services will change. As the future of, our service, adapts, so does obviously the offer that we provide. When we did the consultation with the community and the schools especially, there was a bit of a split difference on terms of the providers, what they did provide, and some of them, preferred to go their own way. However, those who had a slightly different opinion or preferred to go their own way felt that those organisations, which is listed in the report on page 9, actually did a really good job. They were well embedded in the community. They knew their students. They knew, who needed help and assistance, and they provided that service. And of course, as the need changes, especially around the future of the tower, whatever that may be, changes as well. These services will be able to adapt in helping those children and young people get through the next phase, the next few years, and provide the best possible service that we can to them. So we did listen to what the respondents had to say, and we've tried to adapt that as much as possible. So I'd like to also say that this is not the exact same service that has previously been in place as well. This is going to be a different service with different needs, but provided by the same providers, again, of which we got great support of when we received our consultation responses.
This is an excellent paper, but when I was reading it, it suddenly reminded me, this is about emotional health and well-being. I just wondered where the NHS were in all of this, and it just reminded me that back when we pledged 50 million to Grenfell Recovery, so did that was to match the NHS, and while I feel we've been very transparent and responded to requests for even more transparency, I can't actually recall ever seeing a plan by the NHS, and this is the sort of area of spending where I'd really expect to see them feature, and maybe they do, I just don't know about it, but I'd love to know what your view is.
Thank you, Mary. No, that's a really good question. So, as you know, and as other people watching at home may know, we, with the NHS, match funded what the NHS was going to provide, and that was going to be obviously emotional health and well-being support, not only for children but also for adults as well. In terms of where that funding may be or where that is, what the next steps are on that, I'm going to probably pass to Callum, perhaps, who may be able to assist with that question. Sorry, Callum, if you're not the right person, do let me know, and then we'll be able to go from there.
And Callum, can I add to that? I suppose it's a point about what's happening now, but as we can see from our Grenfell Recovery Programme, the money will go for the next 3 years. When our funding ceases, because we have spent the 50 million that we have committed, what happens then? So where do our NHS partners pick it up? So two sides of questions. What are they doing now, and what will they do to pick up when our funding ceases?
Thank you, councillors. So I think in terms of the first question, interestingly, we were in a workshop this week with NHS colleagues looking at how they're planning on trying to utilise and update their health and wellbeing strategy, and I think they are considering trying to look forwards and try to plan in similar ways that we've been able to with the resourcing framework. So rest assured, we regularly have conversations with them about understanding how they're utilising their investment and how we try to make sure that we're dovetailing as effectively as possible and picking up the responsibility where it should lie. I think, to your question, Leader of the Council, I think there is a wider point around how we collectively with our NHS partners transition towards the future. And I think one of the reasons why we put out in the resourcing framework a 3-year plan was very much to avoid sort of annual budget setting and to enable us to look forwards. And I think I'm hopeful that the NHS are looking to do the same. And what that allows us to do is to encourage resilience, encourage sustainability, and look both within our own programmes but also across the rest of the business and the rest of the local public sector to ensure that the right services have a way to develop into the future.
Thank you. Now, any other questions from anyone here? Jem? Kim? No? Nothing? Yeah. Okay, I just have to ask one other thing. Because most of the people you know, the providers you know, etc. But then you've got some money for new people coming in. Yeah? Do you know who what the initiatives might be yet, or it's just you've just earmarked money?
I'm going to pass to Annabelle for that question, if you don't mind, Elizabeth.
Not at all. So yes, you're absolutely right. There'll be a new community-based grant fund. At the moment, we haven't earmarked or designed those. We're in the process we've developed an ask, and we are putting that out to the broader community, to broader community providers. So there's an expression of interest process that's being run through June. And that will give us a flavour of the providers, the programmes they might offer and how they might complement the existing services that we're seeking agreement for tonight. And then in July there'll be a formal grant application process where we'll be able to consider the proposals in the broader context of the offer that we've set out here and the broader offer available within the LA and across our NHS partners too.
Thank you. And I was just about to say, we'll go to the recommendations, and I suddenly caught Mary-Therese's eye. So as chairman of the Select Committee, perhaps you've got some comments or...
Yeah, if I could ask a question, Joss, which came actually out of the Audit Committee this week and also from OSC. There was a lady from Henry Dickens House who was very upset about, I think, the outside space in particularly being used by the Latimer Community Art Therapy. So she was sort of, the feeling she had was it had sort of been dumped down there without asking the people of Henry Dickens Court whether they particularly minded. The other thing is that there is a feeling that money is being given to sort of favourite organisations, and that some of the maybe the more long-standing, so I'm told, organisations have not received funding. So I wondered how you can address that perception in July when you have your new grant funding to make sure that you know, you can say that it's all open and, you know, the best people get funded.
Thank you, MT. I'll take the second question first, if you don't mind. So there are no, you know, favourite people or favourite providers. I would say, though, that we did reflect on the basis of what the feedback was in the consultation, that, as I mentioned before, people fed back that they felt that the services provided so far by a range of those community providers, like you said, Kids in the Green, LCAT, you know, Catholic Children's Society, A Place to Be, etc., did provide a service, and they provided a really good service that they felt offered real change and real support within the community. Of course, when we launched the consultation, you know, we weren't necessarily expecting, you know, we had expecting a diverse range of opinions. I mean, schools could have opted to provide for their own commission services, which was an offer in the consultation response. They responded back differently, saying they preferred the current providers, as I said earlier, because they knew the community well, they were based in the community, they knew the children, they knew some of the challenges, and also some of the changing challenges coming down the track as well. So that's why it's recommended in the report, on the basis of that feedback, that we continue with some of the providers, both in school-based settings and the community-based settings. In terms of the first question regarding Henry Dickens and LCAT, there are challenges and there are ongoing discussions on that, but I'm going to pass to Councillor Taylor-Smith, who falls in his portfolio, and he'll be able to explain further.
Thank you, Josh. So I think I'll just start by saying both LCAT and Henry Dickens RA are both fantastic organisations individually that, you know, provide a great service to the residents. Unfortunately, you know, they are at war, and I think it's very, very upsetting. There's been an annual general meeting this week that there is a lot of hostility between both of the organisations. I've received two very long letters of complaint, one from LCAT, one from the Residents Association, both, you know, complaining about each other. We have spent, goodness me, probably about 2 or 3 years trying to reconcile both sides. We've engaged independent arbitrators to try and work together, and we felt that we got quite close on the basis of having a split between about 70% for LCAT, 30% of the use of the community's beds between them, which effectively meant that LCAT delivered their services on midweek, and the weekends were then with the Residents' Association. That unfortunately fell apart, and there's now an argument over who has Saturday mornings. And the result of this is that we are writing to residents tomorrow, and we are going to organise an independent ballot using an independent third party, so there can be no suggestion, as outlined in both of the letters, of sort of coercion, etc., in order to allow the residents to make that decision on the use of the Saturday. And then I would sincerely hope that having made that decision, that both parties will accept it and then get on to operate within those restrictions and provide the great service that they do. Thank you.
Any other questions or any other comments? No? Okay, on that basis, could we please all agree the recommendations in paragraph 2, which is the grant funding? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Could we now go to paper A6, which is North Kensington Community-Based Recovery Service for Adults. So, Jem, over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. What we have tonight is a paper here that's is very much a response from listening to users of the service, the Together for Grenfell service, listening to where there were gaps in provision and what they themselves wanted us to offer going forward. There's also a very interesting new project, which will be the Peer Support Network, which is following on from good research in disaster recovery. It's very important that people are able to support one another going forward, well beyond the Council's resources in the next few years, and being able to support each other for the rest of their lives. The Together for Grenfell consortium very specific in that they work across multiple languages, across a number of ethnicities, which are often somewhat more cautious when going for publicly provided services, especially around mental health. Mental health has obviously been widely reported across the country in the last year, but there is an acute stigma among a number of communities with accessing these services. And this provision here is something that has worked for the residents. The recent feedback shows over 93% of them have been very satisfied with the service that's being provided. And I think we're also recognising that there is a need to make sure that adults are being provided for as well. We've just had a paper for children. This is obviously our provision for adults going forwards. It offers both ongoing funding for the Together for Grenfell Partnership, but it also offers this peer support network, which I believe will be very useful for residents as they progress through their lives. So, yes, I'll put that to you.
Can I ask the first question? Something that I was confused over, but maybe you can help me. The proposed investment, I thought that so if you look at paragraph 6.12, I thought we had agreed the recovery envelope 2 years ago, and that we were looking at sort of stepping down every year. But in this paragraph, you talk about additional money. So does that money come from, where does that money come from? Somewhere else in the system, or it's completely additional to the amount that was promised?
Thank you. My understanding is it is part of the resourcing framework, and we had agreed to spend more on our adults, but perhaps Gareth would like to explain exactly how we came to these amounts.
I'll make a start, and Callum may wish to add to that. Thank you. Based on understanding of changing need, and based on the overall amount in the framework, there was information from attendants at the adult services to date that there are significant areas or characteristics in the community that have not been served by the breadth that there is at the moment. So we can see from the data in these reports that by far the overwhelming majority of attendees at some of these services have been women. And whilst adjustments have been made throughout the life of the contracts to recruit male counsellors to attract people to those services, we've missed out some services, we've missed out some provision for men, and we've also missed out some provision for older adults who haven't been able to access these services. So on the basis of there being a large degree of unmet need amongst adults, that's why the proposal was made in the frameworks to address that balance for the provision for adults.
Thank you. Johnny.
Thank you, Jem. I think this is a really strong paper. And actually, one of the things that really shines through is that where there are gaps identified, there's really clear action. So, for example, where we're looking to tackle social isolation and loneliness, I can see that there are going to be targeted therapy groups and counselling for some of our older residents. But speaking as a young adult who lives in an estate in the borough, I'm particularly drawn to the first gap that you've identified and the need to respond to emotional health and well-being support for young adults in the area, which is something that that totally resonates for me, particularly during the coronavirus pandemic when we've all been living in these unprecedented times. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, or maybe officers can, why you think having these champions, which sound like a wonderful idea, are the right response to that gap that you've identified, and kind of what their role will be, and just expand on that a little bit.
Thank you, Johnny. Yes, the technical elements of that I'll hand over to Gareth, but I think it's worth saying that 6.3 and on shows just how many enhancements are coming from this paper here tonight. Things like digital exclusion, which of course has been so prevalent across the last year, alongside delivering support in all multiple languages. And I also do want to draw attention again to the peer support element of it, but perhaps Gareth, you first could explain the wellbeing service for young adults and also our learnings on peer support as well, following on disaster recovery.
Yes, thank you. There is one of the four services is particularly targeted at young adults and has been to date, and the use of that has been consummate with the provision that there has been, but it's been oversubscribed in general. In terms of why the particular models that are proposed here are being used, as with all of the design of the models for the service, that's in feedback from talking to the provider organisations that are the existing parts of the Together for Grenfell network, but also talking to residents in the community and other organisations that have put forward ideas but aren't yet part of the Together for Grenfell network. So it's informed by residents in the area, services in the area, but then as Councillor Kamali mentioned in his introduction in relation to the development of a peer support service, in relation to looking at best practice elsewhere and what has worked. We have a community champions model that works in the borough at the moment, so we know that has a good grounding, and we've seen that used elsewhere. So in talking to residents, that's seen as a good option to put forward.
Thank you. Catherine.
Hello, and again, thank you very much for this excellent paper. I just wanted to ask about, I think the peer-to-peer is a great idea, and we've had examples in the community of, for example, the Moroccan ladies cooking together, and I think people working together with their peers is an excellent idea. But I couldn't find in this paper much reference of actually using that peer groups to move onto some skills training or jobs or volunteering, because as we know, actually having a purpose and moving to doing, a job or something is really helpful for mental health as well. So, and another good example, of course, of that is the men's shed. When you actually get a group of men together and while they're doing something, they talk about something else, which I think is a great sort of therapy. So, I just the one bit that was missing for me in this paper was, how you might address some more training and how you help people move on rather than just having therapy. Thank you.
Thank you. I very much agree with you. I think the benefits derived from work and from having a purpose are very important for people's not only mental health, but of course sort of physical and activity, and being able to have a purpose about their day. As to why it's not clearly articulated in the paper, I'm again going to defer to Gareth on that one and what we might be able to do to address it.
So the foundation of the idea, as we've discussed, comes from experience both here and elsewhere. We are, unlike with the Together for Grenfell element of this proposal, the development of the peer-based support offer is still in development, so we are consulting still with residents, having focus groups and workshops on how to do that. There is an outline in Appendix 3 in the paper about some hypothetical scenarios in terms of how an individual in a particular circumstance might benefit from using a peer support model. So it's not without some support in terms of how that might work, but that's the sort of template we'd look to elaborate on before coming forward with the actual proposals for the model.
Sorry, just a quick question. Given the sort of dual hit of both Grenfell and COVID, I just wondered does that open up any other opportunities for funding at all, the COVID related? Sorry, thank you.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that one at all. I'm deferring that to Gareth as well. Sorry.
As part of the recovery programme, there is a strong mental health work stream within that. So we would want to be careful not to duplicate our investment, and there are specific expectations and remits for this investment. But in relation to a previous question about how we make changes to these services over the next 3 years and what happens to them over the next 3 years, one of the things that we want to keep in mind in terms of the recovery investment for mental health in particular is how that can address some of the longer term concerns that will partly come from this work but also from the COVID recovery.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Mary-Therese?
Yes, this has been touched on, but I wonder if you could tell me a bit more about the age profile and especially the elderly, because we all know that they are the most vulnerable, have mobility problems, they suffer from loneliness, maybe language problems too. So what can you do really to reach out to the elderly population so that they can have access to these services, because they might have great need of them?
Thank you. I'm sure as part of that there will be programs in place, but perhaps Gareth has the exact detail.
Yes, not exact detail yet, because that's part of the requirement that we have asked of particularly 3 of the Together for Grenfell providers to reach out beyond the age ranges that have been most served at the moment. So if we look at the Equalities Impact Assessment that comes as part of this, it talks about the age ranges for the different organisations who have access Together for Grenfell to date, and that's going up to the 2019-20 year. We haven't collected as much data this year because we've relaxed some of those requirements under the pandemic. But knowing that there are those gaps there, it's really over the age of 55 where there are currently gaps. So it's the sorts of things that we might ask organisations to do is partly look at some of the volunteers and staff that they're working with and their skills and access to older age groups, the locations in which they are working, and also working in partnership with some other parts of the service and the digital inclusion work that's happening across the council to help some older residents to access some of the online elements of service too. Those are just a small handful of examples, but really it's in the hands of the provider network to work with residents in the community to identify means to attract them into the service in the way that has been successful to date with working age adults.
So that's quite a big gap. You know, 55 to, 90, I mean, that is quite a big age range which currently are not benefiting from what is being provided.
Yeah.
And if I might, that's I hope that's what's reflected in the change in scale of investment that we've seen from the previous year. So where you can see the several-fold increase in investment of the overall service that is coming through, certainly for the first year of this 3-year term, compared to what was £169,000 per year in previous rounds. The increase in investment will allow those organisations to invest in targeting the older age groups in a way that hasn't been possible to date.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'd just like to have one comment just to say that, you know, I've personally known sort of Al-Manar, Al-Hassaniya, Midea, and Making Communities Work and Grow. So it's really great to see them. They were so helpful. They've been so helpful to the community right from, well, from Grenfell, but before Grenfell as well. So it's fantastic that we're using all their knowledge and their ability to reach out, and that they have managed to design a service which is completely relevant to the people who we're serving. And I think it'll be a beacon for other councils to follow, frankly. So on that happy note, I'd like to ask the leadership team to approve the recommendations in paragraph 2, which is approve the grant funding for Together for Grenfell 2021-24, and then also for a peer support programme. So that's in paragraph 2.1. Also approve the overall framework for the peer support programme, which is outlined in paragraph 6.8 and 10, and the continued development of their model, because that will be very important, as it's not going to be stuck in time, isn't it? With peer development, you have to see how it evolves. And finally, to delegate authority to direct integrated commissioning, adult health and social care, following consultation with the lead member for adult social care and public health, to award grants to the organisations forming part of Together for Grenfell. Are we all happy with those recommendations? Agreed? Great, thank you very much. Could we please go on to the next paper then, which is paper A7, which is about the Grenfell Projects Fund and the Community Leadership Programme 2021. So over to you, Anne.
Elizabeth. So we are currently delivering the Grenfell Projects Fund and the Community Leadership Programme for a mixture of online and face-to-face delivery. And just to remind everyone, because it does feel like quite a long time ago, on the Grenfell Projects Fund, we held a 2-day decision day for the community to come together and decide which projects they wanted to have funded. And we'd never done anything like this before. I mean, it was a completely new approach. It was a bit of an experiment. We weren't really quite sure how it was going to work. We used the participatory budgeting system, which I think it was one of the biggest of its kind in the country. So it was really quite groundbreaking, and definitely not something that we would have done before the tragedy. And really we wanted the community to decide what projects they wanted to fund. So we're delivering against what was decided on those 2 days. I mean, obviously we've had COVID in the meantime, which has disrupted the delivery of both of these, the Grenfell Project Fund and the Community Leadership Programme. But we've definitely learnt a lot through going through this process, and I think mainly positive. I mean, I think we've seen lots of really great projects, learning to swim and learning to ride a bike, and all sorts of community-based programmes and ideas brought to life. And we did commit that we would go back out and consult with the community on what phase 2 of this programme should look like, and we have done that. And we have spoken to over 100 residents, and I think actually it's very interesting to have all these papers come together tonight, because I think what really does stand out with them is the consultation and the engagement and the different means of engagement that we're doing on all of these programmes. So it's not just sending out a survey. We did a Grenfell Assembly, we did small groups, we did do a survey as well, but it's lots of different mechanisms for getting people to comment on each of these recovery programmes, and I think that's really great. Actually, I think that it does allow lots of different voices. I think having over 100 people comment on how they want to see this programme evolve is fantastic. So we looked at the themes for the projects, and people were generally happy with the 6 themes that we had. One thing that really did come out was that we have a steering group, a local community steering group. And of course, that does take a little bit of time to set up. So we are working on that. It does mean that there is a delay to the delivery of the second phase of the programme. But actually, I think what residents told us was they're okay with delay if it means that we can have better engagement and a better outcome for the projects when they do finally come to be decided. And on the community leadership programme, we've worked very closely with local voluntary and community organisations to look at what that programme should look like, and we've also heard from another 80 people who've been accessing it. So this is all about training and resilience and learning new skills, you know, which people will have, you know, for a good long while. So again, I think it's a really important and quite groundbreaking programme. So everything is set out in the paper. As I said, it's going to take some time, and therefore there will be delays, but I think actually, as it turned out, I think that's probably a good thing to make sure that everybody gets heard and can contribute. So welcome any questions, comments, any discussion would be great.
Yes, thank you, Anne. It's a great paper. So, I mean, obviously, from a housing management perspective, I'm really interested in this and how you've engaged your residents, because obviously we've done so in a thorough way, but we're always looking at ways of improving. And I mean, looking at your lessons learned, and particularly, obviously, with regard to, I remember attending your participatory budgeting approach, I just wondered, what sort of lessons have you learned, and how do you think they might be applied to other services in our council, including, obviously, we've got our own legacy fund? Thank you.
So I think we've learned that when you take the time to really engage with the users and the people who are going to benefit from the programs, you get to a better solution. I mean, I would say that it takes more time and it is more resource heavy, but you get to a better solution. So that would be a lesson for me. I mean, I'd love to be able to do something like this on everything that we do at the council, but I think, you know, we're not going to be able to do that. But I think on some projects, some programs, having this kind of co-design process which we're going through here, it really does reap rewards, and we're doing something similar on Maxilla, where really we're working very closely with the community on what that building will look like. I might perhaps hand over to Sanjay to just comment on some of the lessons, just because Sanjay's really worked very closely with all of the projects that are being delivered, and I'd just be interested in some reflections from you.
Thank you. So in terms of us ensuring that the programs that we do are effective, meeting with people and talking to them to understand what does that look like, what does that feel like, it takes time. But we learn a level of nuance that we weren't getting before. So where we have some people who have been really, really delighted at a particular Grenfell community programme, we have somebody else saying they're not happy with that. Taking the time to speak to them and find out what that is really about changes our understanding around, maybe it was because they didn't feel that they were aware of the opportunity. Maybe it's because it was similar to a programme that already existed. Maybe it was because they didn't feel that the time of the programme was the right time. It wasn't actually the context of the project. We learnt in Grenfell Projects Fund Round 1 that our faith groups did not feel that they had been included in the process, and that they didn't feel that they could participate in something that felt competitive. It wasn't actually that they didn't want to have community shaping projects, they just wanted it to be less competitive. And so this time we've taken the time to speak with them to find out what would this need to look like to have your involvement. And the response has been overwhelming. Out of the 15 faith groups that we spoke with, they gave us an open invitation that they would reach out to the other faith groups so that we can next engage 74 faith groups. So trying to make sure that we really understand, why do we think we've not engaged? Why does something feel like there's resistance? Simply taking the time to have the conversation changes somebody else's ability to access and share with us what it is that would make that something that they could feel they could be involved in. We've also learnt a lot around organisations who need support and where they need support. Support around due diligence, support to understand what it means to become a constituted group, support around their difficulties in maybe not having the resources to collect data and to maybe have some of the expertise to do that. So now we're looking at how we create support packages from existing organisations within the borough, like Portobello Business Centre and KCSE, to enable those support packages before the application process, during the application process, and after the application process, so that we widen the access for different community groups, and maybe groups that have not yet formed but have the idea of forming, so that they can do that.
Thank you. I think that was really, really fascinating, actually, Sanjay. I think it's really, you read it on paper, but you don't get the fingertip thing, whereas you've explained it absolutely clearly. And I can quite understand what you're saying, is that, if you just say, are you interested or not, you don't really get any of that nuance, do you? Of whether, as you said, or whether it's the right time, or you just feel excluded, or you don't quite, it's just not quite your thing, etc. So I think it's amazing what you've achieved. Johnny?
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Anne, for another good paper. I actually attended the decision day, and you're far too modest to say, but I think it was a really good example of participatory budget setting in North Kensington. And I can see that's borne out from some of the results here about, the vast majority of people recognising that the process was fair and transparent. I guess just reflecting on some of the other results, though, I wanted to ask why you think people are in this instance favouring a resident-led panel alongside the popular vote system that was used, and if you could offer any more insight into kind of what that panel's role will look like and how it might be comprised.
Well, that's a great question, and I think I will ask Tunde to comment on this because Tunde has spent a lot of time with some of the individuals who have asked for it. So insight from you, Tunde, please, on this question.
Sure. So I'll take the second part of your question first. The residents panel, the makeup of it and its form will be entirely up to more community engagement. And I think, just building on what Sanjay said, there's always a temptation to rush ahead and plan things. And that's the biggest lesson we've learnt with this, that even when you make what you think is a very obvious decision, it upsets people. So at the heart of this going forward will be the transparency. So we're going to start off with and I might ask Sanjay to come in because she knows the detail, but we're going to start off with an open invitation to anyone. We will do some research and look at how other resident panels have been set up in the country, and then we'll present back to the community and just work with them until we can form something. There was a first part of your question, sorry, as well. Or was that, or did I answer?
The first part was really just about why you think it is that people are now opting for a resident-led panel alongside the popular vote system that was when I attended last time.
Sure. I think the participation days were really, most people who we spoke to said they were a step in the right direction. But there was quite a few people, including the faith communities, who weren't consulted on actually whether we use a participation day or not. And that probably speaks to the point I made before. So even if you think, actually, it's a really good idea that we can have the residents vote, you still need to actually consult and say, is that the way you want to do it? The second part, I think, for the residents panel is the monitoring of the services, the setting the agenda on how we measure outcomes. It's been quite humbling, actually, being at all of these meetings, because you really it really shows how dedicated the residents of North Kensington are to actually getting this right and really owning their own recovery. And I guess one of the other things, if I may slightly digress, one of the other things that came through is the language they use. So when we were talking about the community leadership programme, they spoke about things, modules that talked about care, forgiveness, as well as what's great to be a North Kensington resident. And I guess as a public servant, I use hard metrics and outputs, and it was quite interesting to see that it's all about, for them, the emotion as well as the outcomes and outputs. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Sanjay.
Thank you. I would just add in terms of why steering group, there was an element around people feeling concerned that it becomes a popularity contest for some residents who are better known or better liked, or maybe not better liked, as opposed to what was needed in the community. So, you know, there are lots of things that we know we do very well in the borough, and there are lots of things that we know that there are lots of resources for, and we've discussed some of those here this evening. There are other things that are seldom heard voices, some of our quieter residents, they want particular things, and it's quite a daunting prospect for them to go to an event like that and feel perhaps to disagree with others or not be heard. As well as the fact that maybe one idea only gets 10 people voting on it, but it doesn't change the fact that that's a genuine gap within the borough that will be beneficial. So something about both. Platforms that enable people to vote in terms of volume, and we can really get an understanding that not only is there lots of people that want this, but there's lots of people who are going to participate in this, therefore it's value for money. But also, how do we make sure that we cater for this tiny community or this small community group, and that we give that small, maybe shy, maybe language, whatever it is, a platform that changes the outcome long term, because that's also our agenda. And it's really humbling listening to these community people. In our advisory group, which is a very small group, and they are very committed to taking ownership for how do they make that group much bigger and much wider, they are talking about, part of our legacy is ensuring that more people have a platform. How do we take ownership for that? And how do we start that within the Community Leaders Programme? How do we start that within the Grenfell Projects Fund?
Thank you. I think that's really interesting. Thank you very much. Catherine.
Thank you. That was so interesting and such a great explanation. I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Sarin and your whole team of officers, because I think this was such a brave and bold thing to do. And like Johnny, I was there at the participationary events, and there was a real buzz, and it was very, very exciting, you know, project to undertake. But actually listening to what Sanjay was just saying, you know, you were absolutely right. There were people that I felt intimidated by it, and there, you know, and that did stir up emotions. So I think it's really excellent that you're looking at it in a different way. But I want, continuing on that theme, I've also been lucky enough to be on some of the focus groups to hear feedback from the projects. And they've been incredibly moving and successful. The swimming one, I love the plant for every household, you know, the variety of them all. So I've sort of got two questions really main. So some of these projects that are so wonderful and successful, can they reapply or can they look for further funding? Because it seems a sort of shame to lose things that have been set up and have got community support and community momentum. So can they come back for another application? And the other one was around just the sort of the breakdown, was looking at the demographic breakdown and this was just about the respondents, of which it was interesting that it was 68% women who responded. And I wondered if that was also reflected in the projects being run. What are more of them being run by women, and are women more sort of taken up with this whole idea of running community projects than men?
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I mean, I think well, as we've heard, I think it's a really great programme, and I think anything that, well, we will learn from going through this process, and I hope that we will apply some of those learnings across the council. And, you know, just on your point about the, the intimidating atmosphere, I mean, there were definitely a couple of groups who, you know, felt very nervous about presenting, and I guess what we're trying to do now is make it more inclusive so that they don't feel that pressure, because, you know, frankly, presenting in front of 100 of your neighbours and peers when you're not used to doing it is not that easy. So I guess we're trying to take that sort of that pressure out of it. I will defer to Sanjay for both your questions about whether they can come back and also the breakdown of women on the projects. But actually another thing I just wanted to say was about how many projects there are actually underway, and there were 56 projects agreed from phase 1, and 28 are live now, 10 online and 18 face-to-face, and 7 have been completed, and there's another 21 to go. So there's a lot of them, and as you say, they are very varied, and they're all quite different. But I do agree with you that it would be a shame to lose all of that great work. So, I mean, perhaps, Sanjay, you could comment on how we'll support some of those projects going forward, whether they can come back, and actually talk about the breakdown of whether it's more women who've applied, because actually I don't know the answer to that. Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you. So out of the 7 who have completed, all of them have been successful in obtaining new funding, so they're all continuing. We are changing our process for next time to make sure that we ask questions around sustainability before people come forward, not to disbar them, but for them to be able to access the support offer that we're putting in place with Portobello Business Centre and KCSE, so that people are thinking through those things. What will sustainability look like? In terms of refunding from Grenfell Projects Fund Round 2, that will be a decision for the steering group. So we said no before, but as we move forward, it's those kinds of decisions that communities want to make a decision on with clear rationale of what they've heard from the people who these projects are for. So I don't know is the answer yet. In terms of women or men, I don't know the answer. From the projects who have fed back, it's definitely more women. From the projects that I have spoken with, it's definitely more women, but I've not met 21 of those projects yet because they've not started. So I will come back and be able to provide that information.
Okay. Well, I think we said a lot about how great the team is and Anne is, etc. But I think we should also pay tribute to the people in North Kensington, right? Because for their energy and their entrepreneurialism and their ideas, and you know, and that they come forward, it's great. Especially, you know, given the history, I think I'd really like to just put a marker down and say we're very lucky that we have such great people in North Kensington who have got such great ideas and energy and want to come forward and want to work with us. That's fantastic. Marie-Therese, I think we've run out of questions on the leadership team, unless there's anyone else who wished to make a comment.
My questions have been answered already, so nothing from me.
Fine. Okay. Please could we then agree the recommendations in paragraph... Oh, before we do that, sorry, I've got one more. I've forgotten. How do you... Because I was looking at the themes of the community leadership programme, and in bold capitals, it sort of says employment, training, education, and quite a lot of the other things say employment skills, digital skills, business and financial skills. So what's the overlap with what Catherine's doing in her department? Because that does seem to be quite a strong theme that, you know, especially after COVID, where especially, you know, when people are looking at unemployment or coming off furlough. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. So we are working with colleagues, particularly Graham Hart.
Okay, so you are.
Yeah. It is a huge need. There's huge demand. It looks very different for different age groups. Yeah, we're working with, we've spoken with DWP, we've spoken with Morley College. We're really trying to understand what's already in place, how can we build on it, and what are gaps as people within those communities see that, and most of our information is coming from economic development because they've already gathered that intelligence, so we're not trying to replicate that, we're just trying to build upon it.
Thank you. If there aren't any, I'm just looking, seeing if there aren't any other questions, could we please agree the recommendations in paragraph 2? The following elements regarding phase 2 of the Grenfell Project Fund and the Community Leadership Programme. So the phase 2 project proposals will only be considered for funding if they delivered outcomes based on the following 7 themes, and that a combination of a resident-led panel and a public vote will recommend which phase 2 project proposals go forward and are funded, and that finally a resident-led panel will monitor delivery of phase 2 of the programme and provide the leadership team with recommendations for improving future delivery. So it's this whole system of going around and continuing to improve, because as Anne said right at the beginning, it was such an original thing to do. There'll always be things to learn as we tweak it. So are we all happy to agree those recommendations? Agreed? Thank you very much. And I think if there's no other business, that ends the leadership team meeting for this evening. And I'll see you again in about 2 weeks when the next leadership team meeting is. So thank you all very much for coming, and good night.